Welcome to Two Teachers in a Table. We're your hosts. This is Mr. Bergman, and I'm Mr. Ripka. Thanks for joining us today for our topic. Our topic of discussion is William Shakespeare. He really needs no introduction. Nevertheless, I do want to say some prefatory remarks. Most of us are aware that he was born in 1564 and died in 1616. Most of us have read his plays. He wrote, or at least it is said that he wrote 38 plays and 154 sonnets. His first play traditionally is said to be Two Gentlemen from Verona, which was written in 1589, so that would make him roughly 25 years old. And his last play traditionally is The Tempest, written in 1611, and that would make him about 47 years old. I say these dates because I'd really like to talk about these 22 years of writing about Shakespeare today, since very little is known about his actual life. What I'm hoping for us to talk about today is what Shakespeare's view of life was, or his philosophy of life, his attitude toward life, and if it developed over his time period as he became an older person. And so maybe we can infer something about his view of life from these 22 years of writing, that is from these plays. And so I'd like to begin by asking Mr. Bergman, what is it, do you think, that we can infer about Shakespeare's view of life from his early plays, specifically if we go with Two Gentlemen of Verona?
Before I actually get into that too, I just wanted to qualify something that you mentioned earlier. As a teacher of English, I have a different point of view than some other teachers of English regarding Shakespeare. When Shakespeare, we were talking about, the fact that many people have read Shakespeare's plays, but Shakespeare did not intend for his plays to be read by anybody except for his actors. The plays were to be performed, and as a result, I think it's really important for any professor or teacher to expose their students to seeing Shakespeare's plays performed, and then read them, or vice versa. But either way, they should be exposed to the dramatic performances of the play.
If I may interject for a second, would you say it's something like reading Mozart's notes as opposed to going to a symphony and hearing Mozart?
Right. Exactly.
Yes, I agree 100%.
And I think one of the most important things, there's a certain nuance in language as performed by actors that is going to get certain emotions, feelings, even comedy across, because some of Shakespeare's comedy can be presented as physical.
Slapstick.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when you have a comedy like The Merry Wives of Windsor, or anytime that Falstaff shows up, and you just have a lot of nonsense going on, and it's all physical comedy.
Yeah.
And some of the and a director may interpret certain lines with their double meaning that creates a humorous or just an effect that says more than what the written word actually says.
The classic example, not from a comedy, but from the tragedy, is from Hamlet. I think a director has to make a choice whether Hamlet actually hears Claudius and Polonius speaking about what Ophelia is going to do to him by eavesdropping, or whether he didn't hear that. And then the actor can act in a certain way when he speaks to Ophelia, when Hamlet is speaking to Ophelia.
Exactly. And it gets it across.
And it gets it across whether, I know why you're here because I heard, or I don't know why you're here, but I'm making guesses.
Right.
When he starts essentially verbally abusing Ophelia.
And even too, if you look at comedies like the Tempest with Caliban, or Calibus, Caliban represents Calibus. The characters who first perceive him are drunk.
Yes.
And so what they're saying is not necessarily what is really there. By the way they're interpreting it because of their intoxication.
Why did you say Calibus? I'm curious. I haven't heard that.
Oh, yeah. Caliban is actually based on a Greek character from Greek mythology. The goddess Thetis, her son was punished by Zeus.
Okay.
And she became very jealous because Zeus's half-son Perseus was left alone by Zeus, but Thetis' son, the sea goddess, was turned into this wretched salamander-like creature. The Caliban is so Shakespeare borrowed that character directly from mythology, classical mythology.
He borrowed quite a bit from other works, and
Midsummer Night's Dream.
Midsummer Night's Dream, I mean, Hamlet. I mean, certain stories were sort of traditional, and many times when these are taught, students start looking down on him because he borrowed them, right? He's like, "What? He didn't make these up himself," and things like this is what sometimes I hear from students. But it always like is tough for me to like help them realize that at that time, being an artist was kind of taking some old story, at least a playwright, and refiguring it for your time or something of this
right.
nature.
And I mean, this was the late Renaissance. People were still interested in Greco-Roman culture. Yeah. And so people were familiar with who these, like Caliban, if they know the story of Calibus, then they expected him to be this sort of slimy and disgusting creature.
Yeah.
And evil. There had to be something bad about him. Of course, Caliban is not really. They find out he's not really evil. As a matter of fact, he's rather timid, which is the irony of that character, because it's a comedy.
Yeah.
He uses that.
It makes me also think of the ancient Greek tragedians, Aeschylus and Sophocles and Euripides, who all used myths that were well known at the time. They just decided to present the myth in this perspective with this beautiful language and so on and so forth. The Oedipus myth, the Oresteia trilogy, just you have Electra, the story of Electra from Euripides. I mean, just tons of stories that are all myths. The audience knows the story, but they're there for the drama of how this artist put it together and presented it.
Exactly. And one thing too we noticed with Shakespeare, when it comes to classical characters to begin with, is the fact that he's good. Once again, he's going to use images with which people are familiar, and they represent certain traits. But sometimes, in one case, when you have the Winter's Tale, and that technically is an old mythological tale that he has reset in a different area. It's Bohemia, but all the elements come right from the classical story.
That's one of his later plays too, right? That was around the time of The Tempest, if I remember correctly. So 1610, 1611. He's getting, I don't know if he's getting ready to retire or if his retirement just happens or if he just quits. I mean, nobody knows a lot or much about Shakespeare's life. We know quite a bit about his plays. But we don't know really much about his wife, or we don't know much about his wife either.
Yeah, exactly.
But we don't know much about his life. We really don't. And so that's one of our goals today, is try to deduce or infer, I guess, from his works, the whole work, the whole opus, what his view of life was. Because some may think it was quite cynical if you read Macbeth, and that's the only thing you read. You'd be like, wow, this Shakespeare guy really, life is this, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more.
And any time that he wrote about royalty, during the time that Queen Elizabeth I was one of his patrons, he was always very careful as to how he handled how those leaders reacted and how other characters respond to them, and what their fate would be. Because when Shakespeare wrote Richard III, he wanted to make Richard the villain because Richard came from the House of York, and the House of York, of course, had fought the House of Lancaster, who were the Tudors, and so Elizabeth's family came out of the War of Roses winning against Richard III's family. However, Elizabeth was still very concerned with the fact that a royal figure was being shown in such a negative light. And supposedly she attended one of the performances in disguise and stood up and said to Shakespeare, "Know ye not that I am Richard III?"
As in the line, the lineage or something like that.
Right, exactly.
He actually wrote quite a bit, or he wrote quite often about the royalty. You got Henry the Fourth, Part 1, Part 2, Henry the Fifth, Richard the Second, Richard the Third.
Right.
I mean, I would imagine even like Macbeth, it's not about sort of a king in that line, but he's trying to. It's a Jacobean
Right.
play. It's for the new King James.
Exactly.
Really. Yeah.
And also Julius Caesar,
Oh,
just
yeah.
probably one of the best examples.
Titus Andronicus.
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
A lot of these sort of historical figures.
Right.
Yeah.
So Antony and Cleopatra
Anthony Cleopatra.
would be another example.
Coriolanus.
Yes.
Coriolanus, another one. Yeah. He almost has, if we grouped him, and it's traditionally grouped in this way, right? That is, you have your tragedies, your comedies, your histories, and then your sort of problem plays, as it's called for some reason. There's no problem, I find, with the play itself. The problem comes from trying to label what kind of play it is, right?
Exactly. What it fits into.
What it fits into, right?
But just going back to your original question, though, about the two gentlemen of Verona, what is particularly interesting, because he was a young man, is and I found out that when the last performance that I saw, I can't take credit for coming up with this, but whoever wrote the playbill that was given out during the performance talked about it as being, the bromance of its time.
The first bromance,
exactly.
basically. Yeah.
And that sort of relationship that two young men who have studied together or close friends go off into the world together and support one another.
Yeah.
And they support one another in their relationships as well. The bro code.
Yeah.
They know what's going on, but they're able to keep secrets and be able to assist, be able to lie, be able to hide, do whatever.
Yeah.
So you have both Valentine and Proteus, who always have each other's back. As they pursue the women of their choice.
Yeah.
And of course it leads to a series of comic events in that relationship that the two characters have with one another. And certainly Shakespeare would have been that age where young men would have been supporting each other in their various careers or ambitions in life.
Do you think perhaps that the things Shakespeare was going through during his life find their way somehow in these plays in one way or another? Exactly.
And you need to remember, too, as an actor, that was considered one of the lowest professions that you could possibly have at the time. They had terrible reputations, which is why women, the women's parts were played by young men, because if women had been a part of their troupe, there would have been scandal after scandal after scandal. And women didn't want that connection, so they simply didn't perform in those plays. A lot of women wouldn't even go to see them because of that. And so first of all, I had to combat that. The second, there was very little money in theater. You could reach fame and still not reach fortune at that time, unlike today. And also, he wanted the ability to do everything that you could in the drama industry to make money. He wanted to write plays, he wanted to perform plays, he wanted a theater to manage or own. And that's a lot. And train actors to be able to be a part of that, to be the best, because he was in competition. Also, naturally, there were other playwrights, his contemporaries, with whom he was rather friendly, from what I understand. If you look at Marlowe.
He was friendly with Marlowe, even though Marlowe died early, right? He died early in like a bar fight or something, if I remember.
Very scandalous life.
Yes.
A terrible reputation. And once again, did he really earn that reputation, or was he given that reputation because he was an actor?
That's a great point. And some think, of course, that Marlowe might have written some of these plays that are attributed to Shakespeare.
Right.
It's always hard to say that's Shakespeare's play alone, Did somebody else write it? Did somebody else help him?
Right, or was it influence?
Was it influence? Right. Is this, do we have the original copy, or do we have one of the actor's editions who make changes in his own, or I guess his own edition?
Right, or all the many years that it was performed even after, Shakespeare's death. Who changed what?
Yeah.
We have printed editions today, but who edited those?
Right.
And, many people. And their names are sometimes, associated, this edition, that edition, of this publication. And definitely some of the language was even brought into more standardized spelling. We know that for a fact. In the original manuscripts, there wouldn't have been standards. Spellings would have been different all the time.
Yeah, it makes. I'm still curious. It's so hard to get to what Shakespeare's view of life is, and to sort of philosophy and whether it changes as he ages, it's a very hard question to really explore. But I'd like to, if we can, do you want to move on drastically, that is, go from Two Gentlemen and a Verona to The Tempest, or should we stop by Midsummer Night's Dream and the tragedies before we get to The Tempest?
We definitely could.
You want to do that? Maybe. So perhaps we can move then to, we've talked a little bit about the histories, that he had interest at least in histories. But how about Midsummer Night's Dream? You want to discuss that play and perhaps what we can infer about what Shakespeare is going through, or what he's putting in that play at least?
Well, it seems to a lot of his comedies are, they're comedy of errors naturally, but they also show the relationship between men and women very frequently.
Yes.
Which was courtship and marriage was a big deal. As a matter of fact, Shakespeare has just written beautifully about how men and women respond to each other in a relationship, to the point where there's a song called "Oh Mistress Mine."
Oh, I love that song.
Comes
Oh, Mistress Mine,
yeah,
where are you roaming?
Yeah, it's from one of his plays.
Yeah.
And if you really read the words to that, it's so beautiful. Only a young person in love can sing it. Because the man is basically, the young man is telling the woman who is sweet and 20.
Yeah.
So she's at the prime time for marriage. Yeah. Like, now is the time for us to stop running away, stop walking away, stop playing hard to get. Now is the time in our life where we will enjoy our relationship like never before, and certainly not after. Yeah. When we're older people. And
that's what that song is exactly.
Yeah, that's what it's about.
I always thought it meant that he was something like "Give me kisses, sweet and 20." I always thought it meant 20 sweet kisses.
Yeah.
But I think now I'm seeing it in a more interesting way. She is the sweet and 21.
Right. Or kiss me, sweet and 20.
Yeah, and, I like that.
Yeah, and so at that age, and I mean you know yourself, if you're 20, 20-year-olds. I mean, it is a magic time in your life, absolutely magic.
Especially if you're in love.
Yeah, and you discover things about people that you didn't notice before. Mm-hmm. And remember, in those days too, they didn't live as long as we do now as a rule. So it's like if they did want to get it started on families, 20 would have been the last time, your last chance. Mm-hmm. And that's an idea. Where are you going? Mrs. Wine, where are you going? It's like stay here. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah,
it's beautiful, beautiful song.
Yeah, any wise man's son knows, or something like that. I think he says. I can't remember the rest, but it's just
and
do you know it?
I can't remember the rest, but it's like that. But I was thinking though, while we're speaking of songs, another song was what is it? About the guy who's selling stuff.
Is this?
As a matter of fact, Sting had done a version of it.
This isn't "The Rain It Raineth Every Day."
No, but I have heard that.
That's a beautiful one too.
I know. Although my words be trash, the heart is true.
Okay, yes.
Yeah, that's the heart is true.
I think you're right.
It's about a man, and again, a man talking about to a woman, but he's comparing himself to being a salesperson, selling trinkets. And in those days, if you went to London Bridge, there would have been vendors on it. They'd actually had little trays strung around their neck with their wares on them.
Oh, I see.
And so he compares that. This is what I have to offer is nothing compared to my love. Yeah. And so he says, if my wares be trash, the heart is true.
Oh, I see.
Which again is really beautiful. But
a lot of his sonnets explore that too.
Yes, and he uses this expression of turtles and twins. And people always wonder when they see that, what does that mean? And it's like, basically, it's Elizabethan expressions for two peas in a pod.
Oh, nice.
You have turtles, it's turtle doves, and turtle doves mate for life. And so if you see one, you always see the other one there. And twins would be, you're my other half.
I see.
And
well, it's a double. I mean, this is a perfect image for a marriage.
Right, exactly. And so, he was, and what's so nice is the innocent romance about that glorious Elizabethan, early Jacobean time. Now, I mean, everything is so wrought with, despair and anguish. And, in those days, it was the pursuit of love, the pursuit of beauty.
Mm-hmm. And if there was any suffering or pain, it was because you weren't able to get the person you loved, or
And there was something beautiful in that.
There was something beautiful.
Almost patriarch.
What do you say to
Lars on it.
What do you say to
That's
this?
another story.
We might
Another
have time.
episode.
Yes. What do you say to a student who says, "I don't get it. I don't get why Romeo and Juliet want to get married after knowing each other for one day, or something like this, or now they're killing each other because didn't they just meet? Like a lot of students, I find, and it's not universal, but find, and these are good questions to ask, I think, but." What is your response usually to something like that, or do you not get this?
My response is, if you're 16 years old and you're saying that, you're not very romantic.
Yeah.
Because I certainly know, that when you're 16 years old, you have it in your mind, I'd get married tomorrow, I'm so in love with this person I just met.
Yeah.
And it's real love, and I know it's love, because
Yeah.
that's the impulse of young people. And I think it's true, not just love, it's anything that young people do.
Anger.
Anything they get a passion for. Gamers is a perfect example.
Video game.
Yeah. They played it once and they're hooked on it.
Yeah.
And certainly, in the days before they had all that, I guess maybe we have too many diversions. But, back then, how, puppy love is, you swear it, you swear it's a real thing. This is it. This is going to last forever. And Romeo and Juliet were those kids.
I wonder if, like the people who say that about Romeo and Juliet have not experienced it yet. Perhaps haven't experienced this sort of love that
Falling in love.
Falling deeply or madly, or falling in love to the point where it absorbs your consciousness. And yes, like I said, Dr. Johnson said, right, the person who's tired of Shakespeare is tired of life. I mean, and I think we're kind of suggesting that Shakespeare, that is, not only shows you love, but shows the depth of love, the pain,
and the depth of the human condition in general.
Depth of the human condition.
And I think that's exactly what's meant by that expression. That if you're tired of Shakespeare, you're tired of life, because Shakespeare represents every single human condition. Love, loss, tragedy, a coincidence.
How does one man do all of this? I wonder, throughout.
Renaissance man.
The Renaissance man. Yeah. Well, I once also, to come back for a second, I once heard another teacher say to somebody who was like, "Why are we reading Shakespeare?" And the response was, "Shakespeare knows more about you than you do."
Who did you hear say
I
that?
was a teacher a while ago. I don't remember exactly, but I remember liking that line. The more you read Shakespeare, the more you learn about yourself, in a way. And I'm wondering, to come back to our larger question.
That's a good point.
Does that make sense? I wonder, coming back to our larger question, if any of these characters that Shakespeare creates aren't like parts of Shakespeare in there. I know this is maybe a jejune question, but that is, is he Hamlet, or is he Macbeth, or is he one of the brothers from Verona, or is he Prospero?
Or is he all of them?
Is he all of these? I mean, the question, though, jejune is also kind of allows you to think, wow, you can't find Shakespeare specifically. He didn't write himself into any play, but he's in all of them, or into any character. He didn't make one character himself, I don't think, but he's in all of these characters, as we all are too, right?
Well, and what's interesting about that is that we, all of us are that complex, but there's no artist that does not put his or herself into what they do. It's recognizable immediately.
But his is almost impersonal. That is, it's not Shakespeare. I mean, it is, but it's not like he's sitting down writing, this is going to be a sort of autobiographical character.
Well, yeah.
That's what
right, you have to disguise it a certain bit, because a lot of those characters are very vulnerable. And they can be vulnerable in front of the audience for you. I think that's a beautiful thing about creating art. It can express things that maybe you yourself really couldn't.
I really like what you said, that we're all complex. Right? Not just the artist or the athlete or the professor, but every single human being is complex.
Absolutely.
And has an inner life that has depth.
And he said
and
too
great
that we
meaning.
play many roles.
Oh,
in
yeah.
life. I mean, you think about it, you know, you go to our students, they're an athlete, and that's one whole role and one whole group that recognize, and they're students, and only teachers would recognize that. You know, they're sons and daughters, so their parents recognize that. You know, some are in, you know, different Boy Scouts or whatever organizations, and they become that. And we all have that. We're all that.
So he does have these plays that he plumbs the depths of love in a way. Midsummer Night's Dream being one, but then he goes through this sort of, I want to call it a tragic period, if we want, 1600 to about 1606. He writes, of course, Hamlet, King Lear, Othello, and Macbeth. Right, the four great tragedies. Did he go some sort of crisis?
See, well, I was wondering if there was some kind of treachery that he encountered. Somebody stabbed him in the back, so to speak,
and he's
or cheated, because every one of those characters has there's that whole treachery. Something, somebody was stabbed in the back.
Yeah, and
some way or the other.
And I think
in this case, it could be literal.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And Midsummer Night's Dream was written about the same time as Romeo and Juliet. We're still tragedy kind of Romeo and Juliet, but it's love, you know.
Yeah.
And there's I guess treachery.
What's love gone wrong?
It's love gone wrong, exactly. Where Midsummer Night's Dream, you have love that's gone wrong for a little bit, but then it fixes itself,
Reconciles.
kind of. Reconciles.
Oh,
and
you
comes
have
back.
too, The Tempest, which uses love to get an end. To an end that's entirely different, to a realization. And the love goes on fine, but that's not the main part of the story. It's just one more thing that Prospero was able to fix, in a long line of doing things that weren't necessarily for other people's good.
Yeah, I definitely have a question about Prospero, but just to come back to the tragedies for a second, I did hear, or I guess I read from James Joyce, that William Shakespeare had a son named Hamlet. Have you ever heard this? This could be a legend. It sounds like it. And young Hamlet died. At a young age, he died. Of course, Shakespeare wasn't living in Stratford upon Avon, right? He was living in London, and his family was over in Stratford. And so I don't think he was around his son much. He had a wife and he had children. Not much is known once again about Shakespeare,
right.
but
and
I think
his wife was older than he was. We know that. A lot of people think she was a patroness. That's about the best we can get.
And so James Joyce suggests in one of his books in Ulysses that William Shakespeare lost his son about the same time he was starting to write Hamlet, and so he made and that Shakespeare was an actor, as you were saying too, right? And so he made young Prince Hamlet as a sort of like his son. Okay, it's not a character. He's not a sort of biographical character, but he kind of put some traits in there or something. And then Shakespeare plays the father. So it was thought that Shakespeare played the ghost. And so this is James Joyce's sort of, I don't know, reasoning behind Shakespeare's choice to play the ghost, to speak to his son again on stage.
Is this an essay?
It's it was in, I can't remember exactly which book like 9, I think, of James Joyce's Ulysses. He goes to the Stephen Dedalus, a character from Ulysses, goes to the library, and they're having a discussion about Shakespeare, and Dedalus gives his sort of interpretation, which ends up being James Joyce's sort of interpretation. Yeah, but I mean, it's interesting thought, nevertheless, whether it's true or not, because the suggestion there is things in his life do play out on the stage sometimes. And that's what we're kind of trying to figure out. Is like, did he have an arc, or did he have a development in his train of thought about what it means to be human?
Well, and it's interesting.
Tragedies occurring in his life. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay, because I was just thinking, I mean, really, you got me thinking even more about his biography. And there must be full-length, and there are full-length biographies about Shakespeare out there. But of course, any biographer can, they get the bits and pieces, and they have to pull them together some way or another. So you can assume that they've surmised based on other things that they've heard, or the stories that have gone around or whatever.
Yeah.
But I wonder if any of the authors who wrote biographies of him considered, do they when they do it. And I'm sad to say I've never read a full biography.
I don't understand how you get it because the bits and pieces are so few. During the tragic period, that is during his time where he wrote the tragedians, I just want to mention that he was about 36 to 42. So you're getting at a time where you've had some experience in life.
Especially at that time.
At that time.
47 then was a lot older than 47
Yeah,
now.
exactly. So, but now, now he's 47 years old.
You wouldn't know. But.
Well, I'm getting up there. I'm in the tragic period.
I'm in the Tempest period.
And so, for the Tempest, though, I do want to talk about this work a bit. I have a question for you, but I'm curious of your answer to this. And so you don't have to answer it right away because there may be things that you would like to say. I'm curious on why Prospero, at the end of this work, says he's going to drown his books, break his staff, throw it in the water, return to Milan, where every third thought will be of death. What is that about? He was this great magician, really a liberal artist. He had books all over. He read. He was an intellectual.
Well, you need to remember what all that was based upon. All that was based upon the fact that he wanted revenge for what was done to him and his daughter.
All what was based upon that?
All his magic. That he was eventually going to become powerful enough that he could get back at the people he felt caused he and his daughter misery, who banished them to sea, to die. And of course they made it to the Bermudas, to the islands. And then when he first went there, he managed to tame master the magic that took place there until he learned it himself. But the whole purpose was to cause revenge, and he did. He made them. They were headed to a wedding in North Africa and ended up in Bermuda, and through
caused a storm.
Right. And of course, he enslaved Ariel to do that.
It's funny. He slaved both Earth. Caliban, and he enslaved air.
Yes, exactly.
Ariel,
the elements, and
the
they would have
elements,
recognized
and
that.
he's like almost like what a poet does. Takes the earth and makes it something spiritual,
right.
or it commands both of these things.
Exactly, and he realized that no human should have that power. He realized a lot of things were reconciling themselves without his magic. That forgiveness was available, love was still. He was protective of his daughter, and his daughter, falls in love with the enemy, the son of the enemy, and he realizes I really don't have control over these things. They're going to happen, whether they happen or not. And trust me, as a man my age, and I'm way older than 47. But when I look back, not that I look at my every third thought is death, but
I feel like mine is sometimes.
Really, but I do realize that when you're younger, you either think you're controlling things, or you think you have everything under control, and then by the time you get older and get a realistic aspect or a picture about what your life really is, you didn't have control. You did the best that you could, but there were certain. The whole idea to them, in Shakespeare's time, it was a common expression. Even the gods bowed a fate.
Oh yeah.
And of course that came from classical.
Yeah, the idea that you had the humans and then the gods, and then above the gods was fate. Fate actually controlled the gods too. Yeah.
And I think the Prospero represents that in every sense. And he let go, and without his interference, these things all came to pass. And so he had no more use for trickery. It was what it was, and now he could basically. The whole idea is now he could die a happy man.
A happy man.
Especially that he saw his daughter living a more natural life than what they had been living. First she lived this very sheltered life. She'd never seen a man before except for Caliban. And that wasn't much of a man. So when she saw a human man, she immediately, her pheromones kicked in or something. I don't know what it was, but she fell immediate in love.
Yeah, her name is Miranda, and we get the word admire from that. So it's like right away she was admiring this person. And oh, brave new world! Everything's brand new for her.
Exactly. So and if Shakespeare was probably at that time in his life where he was older and wiser, and could any illusions. And being an actor, you can imagine, and we even know today, because we hear about Hollywood stars, they have a hard time separating their reality from their characters sometimes.
Yes.
And they do.
I always think it's more difficult for an actor to age than for a non-actor.
Right.
Because you're
That's part
constantly
of it.
seeing yourself, and then your characters that you are given start becoming fewer types of characters.
Right.
For it just seems like a difficult life sometimes to age
Right.
in that way. What is the thought about that I've heard where Shakespeare not is Prospero, but is doing the same thing? It's his last play. He's putting his pen down. Prospero is burying his books and breaking his staff, and he's going back to Milan. Shakespeare's going back to Stratford. You think there's any sort of I don't know.
Well, I like to think
thought
that.
there.
I'd like to think, and I thought about this before, that Shakespeare was. He said everything he needed to say. It comes to the point. I remember when I was.
He said everything.
When I was in high school, I had this brilliant English teacher, and I wanted to be this writer of fiction. And so I went to him and said, "With the way you write 100 times better than I do. Why aren't you writing a novel?" And he looked at me and said, "I have nothing to say." And I thought, wow, it's true. In order to go out and write, you have to be able to say something. Something has to mean something to you so much that you need to say this stuff. You need other people to hear this for whatever reason. And Shakespeare had been doing that his whole life. And maybe it's almost like, a television show. They finally cancel it because they just can't do another episode without repeating. And let's face it, some of Shakespeare's plots are very similar.
That's a very good point.
Especially with the comedies of errors. Sometimes it's hard to tell one from the other if you just see a small scene from one.
That's a good point.
Which play is, it's The Tempest, or it's Midsummer Night's Dream. And I think that was it. It was retirement. More or less. And I just wonder if that at that time, because his wife had that home and that property, and I never understood his financial situation or hers really, but maybe it was time to leave the hustle and bustle of London, that very unsettled life of an actor that was for young people. Pass the torch and move on. Maybe.
Yeah,
That's pure speculation, but
Yeah.
I can sense that being my age, I'm looking forward to retirement.
Yeah, I agree. So, was there anything else you'd like to add before we kind of wrap up? I know you and I could sit here and probably continue to talk
Absolutely.
about Shakespeare. We could have a whole season of episodes for our Two Teachers and a Table
And
just
I'm sure
on
we have
Shakespeare.
some crew people here who might need to be going before too long.
Yeah, exactly. So we should probably wrap this up. However, is there anything else you wanted to add?
That's pretty much.
That's pretty much
Yeah.
for now. Let's say for
For
now.
now.
Yeah. So thanks for joining us again at Two Teachers and a Table. We were trying to explore trying to explore Shakespeare's philosophy by looking at all of the plays, and I'll let you conclude from our discussion for yourself what Shakespeare's philosophy of life was. We'll see you next week. Thank you.